All right. Well, good evening. We're going to start our study of Genesis again. This week we're going to be in chapter 26. We're going to look at starting in verse 23 through 25 to begin with. We'll read 23 through 23 through 35, but then we'll go back and we'll talk about some of these verses here. So starting in 23, it says, "From there he went up to Beersheba." Now that's Isaac. Isaac went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you, and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there, called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. When Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzah, his advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army, Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me, and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." So we said, "Let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now blessed of the Lord." So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. All right, looking back up at verses 23 through 25, it says this: "From there, he, Isaac, went to Beersheba." Now, the word Beersheba, just so we know, the word Beersheba means well of seven. Well of seven. It's also connected with the concept of an oath, and we see that later on. At least it sounds like the Hebrew word for oath. There's some similarities there. So from there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you, and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there, called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. All right, so what do we see here? What does God say to Isaac? What's God start out saying? Well, he says, "Fear not," right? He appears to him and he says, "Fear not." Now he identifies himself. He says, "I'm the God of Abraham your father," but he says, "Fear not." Why does he say fear not? Well, in some ways that's kind of a no-brainer, right? Because he was probably fearing. He had been having problems with some of the people of the land over different wells. That was something we looked at last time. There was a bunch of wells. They kept on having contention and fighting over it. And the reason they fought over the wells is because water was a big deal back then. So they're fighting over the wells. And so he could be fearing that. He could be fearing the other nations, the peoples around. Remember, he had lied to Abimelech early on. He could be fearful of those people. Are they going to retaliate? Are they going to come and they're going to attack me? What are they going to do? So he's fearing. He could have been afraid of all kinds of things. He might have been worrying about water. He might have been worrying about other people attacking him. He might have been worried about not having enough supplies for his household, his flocks, whatever. There was a lot of things that he probably could be worried about. But he's fearful of something, right? Otherwise, if he's not afraid of something, then why does God say fear not? It really wouldn't make much sense, right? If I told you, if you weren't afraid of anything and I said, hey, don't be afraid. You say, I'm not afraid. What are you talking about? I'm not afraid. So clearly he's afraid of something. You know, what I find interesting is we'll see this phrase used a lot. God will come to a person or people and he'll say, fear not. He said it in the past to Abraham. Abraham was fearful over different things. God came to him and said, fear not. Here, God is saying the same thing. Don't be afraid. And we see that Jesus in the book of Revelation, we see that he says to John, he says, fear not to John. We also find it in the life of Joshua when Moses is departing and he's going to take over. Fear not. Don't be afraid. I'm with you, God says. So this concept of fear found throughout the scriptures, God comes along and says, fear not. So here he says to Isaac, he says, fear not. And he reassures him, right? God reassures him that he's going to bless him and that he's going to have lots of descendants. He's going to be provided for, right? If Isaac is going to have lots of descendants, and that means whatever he's afraid of, he doesn't have to be afraid of. God's going to take care of it, and there'll be proof in the future because his people will multiply, his descendants. He's going to have lots of descendants. Of course, we want to ask, what's that statement from the Lord remind us of? What does that statement from God remind us of? Well, it reminds us of what he had said to Abraham. You remember, he says to Abraham, I'm going to multiply your offspring. You're going to be numerous. So here he says, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring. Now he's going to do it for my servant Abraham's sake. Remember, he had given the promise to Abraham. So he's going to be faithful to Abraham, and he's going to be faithful to Isaac as well. But he's doing the same thing that he did for Abraham. He's doing it for Isaac now. The promise, the seed promise, the promise to multiply, the promise to be with, the promise to bless is now passed from Abraham. Now it's with Isaac. So he's really reiterating and again passing on that blessing, that promise. And we'll see this passed along to Jacob as well. It's going to continue to be passed along. And ultimately, the reason the promise is there is for what? Why is God blessing Abraham? Why is he blessing Isaac? Why is this a pretty much an unconditional covenant and blessing that he makes with them? Because ultimately what God is trying to do is bring about the Messiah, the Christ. So he is going to bless, he's going to bring about this nation, Israel, and Israel is going to be the vehicle by which he brings Jesus into the world. And from there, God is going to bless all the families of the earth. So God is passing now along and kind of reminding Isaac of these blessings. What does Isaac do after God comes to him and reassures him? Well, there's four things. There's four things that he does. The first thing is Isaac builds an altar, right? You see it right here. So God comes to him, says, I'm going to bless you, going to multiply your offspring. So he built an altar there. He builds an altar. He builds an altar to the Lord. Now, back at this time, an altar was either just a rock, you'd set up a big rock, or you would set up a bunch of rocks, and you would make this kind of altar. It wasn't real elaborate or anything like that, but he builds an altar, and he is going to call upon the name of the Lord. That phrase, call upon the name of the Lord, again and again and again, we've seen it. This is worship language. Everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved, we're told in the New Testament. So there's this aspect of worship that's going on here. So he builds an altar and he calls upon the name of the Lord. Now, what does that tell us about Isaac? What does it tell us about Isaac that he builds an altar, that he calls upon the name of the Lord? Well, it tells us that he's a worshiper, right? So he's a worshiper of the one true God. It tells us that he wants to honor God. So that's why you build an altar. That's why you offer sacrifice, is to honor God. I think it also tells us that he believes God. Why would he worship if he didn't believe? God makes this promise to him. God reiterates some things. God says, I'm going to be with you. And if Isaac didn't believe God, he wouldn't have built an altar or anything like that. So he believes God. He builds an altar. He's worshiping. So all of that tells us a little bit about Isaac. We also see that Isaac pitches his tent here, and his servants dig a well. Those are the other two things that go on here, right here. He pitches his tent, and Isaac's servants dig a well. What's that tell us? It tells us he's settling down. It tells us he's settling in. God has come to him in this area, and he's going to settle down in this specific area. And that tends to be kind of a common theme. People, when they meet God or they experience God or they have a vision of God or something like that, they build altars. They might dwell in that part of the land. It's become very special, very significant, because God makes himself known in that place. So there's a connection between the place that they experience God or a blessing from God or something. There's a connection that happens, and they want to stay connected to that. Very similar to what we experience today. A lot of times we like to go to a specific building, don't we? We come to Christ and we go to a specific place in order to worship God. And that's good. We should do that. The place itself is not necessarily any holier or than any other place, right? This area that Isaac is in, it's not that it's any holier, but it holds significance for him. And the same thing is true. We meet at the Park Hills building, at the church building there. Of course, we haven't met in a while, and this might be relevant for us today, right? We want to meet together, that's true, but we also have a connection to that building. Not because the building's anything special or holy. We meet God in a special way, in a sense there. We interact with one another. We've shared certain experiences with one another there. Week after week, we participate in the supper there. We read the Bible there as a group, collectively. It's an experience, right? So you can kind of think of what Isaac is doing here, pitching his tent, digging a well. He's going to settle down here. Kind of the same way that we would view maybe going to the church building, the specific one in Park Hills. It holds a unique place in our heart and in our lives. Again, we have to be careful. We have to be careful that we don't make too much of the building or the place that we worship, but it's still significant. It's still significant. So that's what's going on there. He's pitching his tent there, and he is staying at the place where he has experienced the Lord. All right, let's move on. We're going to look at verses 26 through 33. 26 says, when Abimelech went to him, that is, Abimelech went to Isaac from Gerar with Ahuzah, his advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army. Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me, and have sent me away from you? They said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you. that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you, and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. Okay, so what's going on in this section here? What are we looking at? What are we seeing in the life of Isaac? Well, we notice that Abimelech comes to Isaac. And the reason he comes to Isaac is there's multiple reasons, but he recognizes that God is with him. Abimelech recognizes that God is with Isaac and that God is blessing him. But he also knows that Isaac is a liar. He's a liar. And we know that he has quarreled. Their people have quarreled, right? In the past, we looked at that. They dig a well, they're quarreling, they're fighting over these wells. So Abimelech knows God is with him. God is blessing him. Abimelech knows the Lord is certainly more powerful than he is. He knows that Isaac is a liar, and he also knows that they've been having problems. It's tough when you have problems with a powerful liar. I mean, you think about the wells of water. How do you know? If you're Abimelech, how do you know if your servants have actually dug those wells, or if you actually have claim to those wells, when you've got Isaac who comes along, his people come along, and they're contending for it. But Isaac is a liar. It's hard to believe a liar. It's hard to know what's going on with somebody who has lied. I mean, Isaac has lied about his wife. If he's willing to lie about his wife being his sister, what won't he lie about? He's willing to put his own wife in danger. So there's a lot going on there. So Abimelech wants to really protect himself from this liar who's blessed by God, which is a kind of a strange thing when you think about it, right? There's a liar who's blessed by God. This lying, cheat, something along those lines. So he wants to protect himself. And so the way you do that is you make a covenant with someone. So he's going to seek out. Now, notice he doesn't go alone, right? Abimelech, he goes with his advisor, Ahuzaph, and he goes with the commander of his armies. So he's not stupid. He's going to go with some help there, some protection. Yeah. So he goes, but he wants to make a covenant. He doesn't want trouble with Isaac. Ultimately, he understands, he recognizes that he can't defeat Isaac, it seems, because God is with him. But notice that when they make a covenant in the ancient world, what do? They're going to make a covenant, right? Isaac gives them the, kind of the runaround. Why are you coming here? But they're going to make a covenant. Verse 30. So he made them a feast, and they ate and they drank. There's something important biblically about eating with people. There's something that goes on with that. You don't eat with enemies. You don't eat with people that you don't agree with, that you don't have something kind of in common, that you don't have some kind of shared connection with. So when you make a covenant with somebody, you're connecting with that person, at least in some form or fashion, and it's surrounded by this meal, eating together. And we're going to see this concept of making a covenant and eating that go hand in hand throughout. You're going to see that God is going to eat with, in a sense, he's going to eat with Moses and the leaders of Israel, or at least the leaders of Israel, are going to eat in the presence of the Lord. We'll see that in the sacrifices, right, in the Leviticus, in the sacrificial system, when they have these sacrifices that they're giving, a lot of times the worshiper, along with the priest, are going to eat the sacrifice in the very presence of the Lord, right? They're going to eat it in the area of the tabernacle, later on in the temple area. They're eating with God, in a sense. It's symbolic of eating with God. There's a connection there. There's intimacy there. There's covenant there, right? Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper and speaks about the new covenant in his blood, and he does it during the Passover meal. There's a meal that goes on. And of course, we today, within the church, we gather each first day of the week and we eat that memorial meal. We eat that bread and that juice. We do it as a community, but we do it in the presence of the Lord. And the Lord, in a sense, is eating with us. We are embraced in that covenant. We are in an intimate connection with one another and with our God. So there's eating that goes along with covenant making. So that's what's going on here. It's very important, and it's significant, and you'll see this over and over again in the scriptures. You'll also remember that Jesus, when he was walking the earth, when he was ministering, he ate with sinners and tax collectors. And you remember that the Pharisees had a problem with that because he was sharing intimacy. He was connecting with them. You see it also in the life of Peter. Peter at one point has table fellowship, that is, he's eating with Gentiles, non-Jewish Christians. But there's a point where there's some Jewish Christians that come along, and Peter starts to draw back from having table fellowship with the Gentiles, with eating. We might not think that's a big deal. Maybe we do, I don't know. But it's a big deal for them. And Paul will rebuke Peter for doing that. You can't do that. You are in covenant relationship. So eating together is a big deal. And so they're going to eat together and they're going to make this covenant. That's part of how they do it, is they eat a meal together. You'll notice that in verse 32 it says that same day Isaac's servant. Well, what happens is they eat the meal together, and then Isaac sends them away, Abimelech and the rest, away the next day. So they even sleep in the same area together. He sends them away in peace. And then that same day, verse 32, that same day, Isaac's servants came to him about the well that they had dug and said to him, "We found water." Well, that's good news. Now, there may be a connection going on here between them finding water and them finding peace, in a sense, with Abimelech. Verse 32, Isaac, called it Sheba, and the word Sheba, it means oath, or at least sounds like the Hebrew word for oath, but it's also related to the word Beersheba, right? Because it goes on to say, therefore the name of the city is Beersheba. We talked about what that means. So Sheba, oath, they just made covenants, they made oaths together, and this well is being named. They found water. It's being named symbolically to represent what has already taken place with himself and Abimelech and their people. There is a peace that happens. All right, so we move on to the last two verses in chapter 26. 34 says, when Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Besemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. All right, a couple things. First of all, notice that it's when he's 40 years old. When he's 40 years old, he's getting married. And we see this in other places as well. But he's 40 years old, he's going to get married. The number 40 biblically is significant. sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it refers to a time of suffering or testing or trial, something along those lines. You remember that it rained in Noah's day. When the flood happens, it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. It's a period of waiting. It's a period of suffering, you could even say. Israel, when Israel comes out of Egypt, they rebel against God. God says, I want you to go in and take the land. They say, the people there are too numerous. They're too big. We can't take the land. God says, okay, you're going to wander for 40 years. They wander for 40 years. It's a period of testing. It's a period of suffering. Jesus, he goes out into the wilderness, to the desert areas, and he goes out for 40 days. So 40 is often a symbolic number of testing, of trials, or of suffering. Notice a couple things. First of all, he's 40. I think there's some symbolism there. And not only is he 40 years old, literally, but we'll see. I think there's a connection here with the number of 40 dealing with trials or testing. But he takes two wives. He takes Judith and he takes Besemeth. And both of these are Hittite women. Now, where did Abraham want to get a wife for his son Isaac? Was not from the people around. It was not from the people of Canaan. It wasn't from the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites. It wasn't from them. He wanted to send his servant back to where his relatives come from, get a wife from there. Here we see Esau does not do that. Esau takes a wife from the peoples around. That's problematic. We see that it's problematic throughout the rest of Israel's history when they intermarry with the people around. They can be drawn away from worshiping the one true God. So he marries two Hittite women. Notice what it says in verse 35. And they made life bitter for Isaac and for Rebekah. That's why I think the number 40 here is also symbolic of trials, testing, suffering, because it's connected to him getting married to these two women, and they make the life of Isaac and Rebekah bitter. Isaac gets his wife from his people back in the land of the Ur of the Chaldees and that kind of area. And we're going to see that Jacob does as well. Jacob, little different than Isaac. Isaac doesn't go back to the land, but we're going to see that Jacob is sent back to the land of their forefathers, and he's going to get a wife from there. That's different. Esau doesn't do that. Esau marries of the women who are around, and that's problematic. That causes the bitterness. And remember that Moses is the one who is writing and recording the book of Genesis for the nation of Israel. Israel has just come out of Egypt, and they're at the Mount Sinai, and they're receiving the law. Genesis is part of the law, the first 5 books. And so they need to know some of the history. And this is going to be relevant for the nation of Israel, because what's going to happen is life is going to be bitter. It's going to be hard. It's going to be trials and suffering when they intermarry with those foreign women. So there's even some foreshadowing of what's going to happen with the nation of Israel with this concept of bitterness. We don't know all the details. We're not told all the details. What we are told is that he marries 2 Hittite women, and that life is bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. It probably has to do with or is connected with spiritual matters as well. You remember, these women are going to want to worship their false gods, their false deities, and Isaac and Rebekah and his family are trying to worship the one true God. And so there's conflict here, there's problems. And the women are always turning, these pagan women are always turning the hearts of the husbands away from the one true God towards pagans and idolatry and all of that. That may very well be what's going on here, and it's causing strife in the family. One more reason, right? We can look at this. We can see one more reason why Christians need to marry Christians. If you're a Christian and you're looking to marry someone, you really need to think seriously about the spiritual nature of what you're doing. We're finding this in a number of places, that the spouse that you take can cause lots of problems in the home. And one aspect that we need to contemplate on is the spiritual nature. You remember that in Genesis chapter 6, you've got the two lines of, you've got Seth and you've got Cain. Cain's line is all wicked, ungodly, and Seth's line are the line that call upon the name of the Lord. They come together, they converge together, and they intermarry, and what happens is the world is full of wickedness because the hearts are turned away. The hearts are turned away. Here we see this again. There's bitterness in the home because of a poor choice of spouse. He's picking the wrong women to marry. Absolutely. All right, we're going to end it there for this week. Next week we will, Lord willing, pick it up in chapter 27.